Once again, the audience of RaceSpotTV has spoken and they have asked for carnage. We break out the Lotus 79, we head to the Green Hell, and we get ready to see the battling in the classic Lotus Grand Prix Series. Hello everyone, welcome back to Friday Night Primetime as we get set to follow the iRacing official series around and see what fun that they've got in store for us. Arjuna Kenki party on hand with Will Chadwick once again as we get set to get underway. And Will, I know a lot of people are very excited about this one. The interesting thing though, that when it came to the people's choices, it didn't win overwhelmingly, but this is definitely a popular choice here tonight.
I think when you're ever going against VRS GT Sprint Series, it's going to be quite a close call, but people wanted to see this. It's a unique combo at the world's best track and one of the world's best cars ever made, I guess you could say.
Yes, well, world's best car, maybe. World's best track, now you're getting into the arguments that Lewis McLeod somewhere is listening in and disagreeing with you. Not many wanted to see us go to a street circuit as in Belle Isle, but we've got a similar sort of challenge, I guess, in some ways, but a lot faster, a lot more furious. These drivers, though, continuing to work their way through the classic Lotus Grand Prix series, which pays tribute to this Lotus 79 as it makes its way around the world and to the Grand Prix venues that iRacing has to offer, and what a schedule they've got on deck to run themselves through to the start of September.
Yeah, week number 10 obviously is the best week of the season, but otherwise, looking at that, you have some classic Grand Prix tracks like Brands Hatch. This car did race there in 1978, Long Beach, another classic circuit, some newer circuits like the Circuit of America in week 9, and yeah, no, I think it's a really nice schedule and shows some really good depth as well.
Absolutely, the depth is important because this is a car that with its ground effect was a pioneer in so many different ways, and now we get to see how it does around some of the more modern venues. For example, well, I don't want to say modern and talk about Phillip Island, but I'll say modern when we talk about Circuit of the Americas. The other great thing that comes with this car, though, is the screaming soundtrack that we'll have to enjoy. Drivers out there in practice right now, because the unique thing about racing here at the Nordschleife is that traditionally you will do so with pre-qualifying being done. So these drivers head off into this race session already knowing roughly where they're going to grid up in this running field, and so the warm-up comes to a close and the drivers get set to go racing here for another round of racing in the classic Lotus Grand Prix Series. Ready to run you down through the starting grid as the drivers take their way to the grid. Let's run you down through how they'll line up. Fastest in the blast to build themselves to this race session, Adekoba Lopez. No stranger to Friday Night Primetime, will line up alongside Juha Reina and then Kimo Vilkayan and then Bjorn Rumfeldt, second row. Boy, we're going to be challenged by some of these Finnish names today. Fortunately, not when we have to say Timothy Reed. Then Petter Smetna will be on his outside on row number 3. You've got Seb Alexander in the Indy Alliance Racing colours. In 7th, Jean-Francois Boscus alongside Bjorn Ackerman, and then Wolfram Prund through your top 10 with Steve Sarles and then Robert Simpkins on row number 6. It's Josh Freed, Bjorn Long, and then Adam Klatska and Cam Porter through your 16-car field. Fortunately, not that many names to butcher, it turns out, but the cars get ready for a rather curiously standing start here on that short blast in towards the very first quarter of the Nordschleife. We're ready to rumble for classic Lotus Grand Prix racing. And away we go, already down through the Sabine-Schmidt curve. They'll plunge in towards the Hudson back and potentially a challenge for second as Rhino loses out. Immediately the 3 fires it up the inside and we race our way through onto the Nordschleife.
Yeah, nice start there for all drivers, all getting away well on the clutch. It's such a challenge. Well, when you see a car upside down, I'm not sure what corner that is, but it's a fast right, and that's unfortunate.
I think it's Bjorn Ackerman that had his issue, and then potentially something else happened further back as well for Steve Sarles. But outside of that, all cars still streaking their way down to Flugplatz, where it'll be interesting to see if they get any air for this very first time, if they've got enough speed and downforce to be able to stick to the ground with the ground effects. But already potentially Adekoba Lopez trying to break away.
Well, Koba Lopez definitely needs to break that toe. It's so important around here. You think of it as such a technical track, which it is, but there is some key long straights which allow you to stay with the car ahead of you. At 6/10, that margin is not quite big enough yet for him to break away.
Down the hill, this is where potentially you start to get into the switchback sections more and more, and the draft can be broken. A lot of people sometimes get confused when we talk about 170 plus corners around the combined Nordschleife and Grand Prix layout that gets run for the 24-hour race here. There's a lot of straights that you've got to deal with as well, and one of the talking points that was brought to our attention just a couple of hours before we went live is that some of these drivers are going to be running minimum wing just to try and be as fast in a straight line as possible. That's going to be great through some of these blasts, but it's going to make it very difficult through some of the corners to keep the car steady, keep the car under control. But if you can break away, well, I guess it's going to be a great advantage.
Absolutely, there's nothing more of an advantage than just having that straight line speed. It's something that you can't control as a driver behind the wheel. Having the straight line speed advantage just gives you that always advantage when you're on the straight and in a straight line, obviously, but it's just such a key thing to have around this circuit despite the amount of corners.
We come to the slowest part of the Nordschleife, down at RaceSpotTV, where these drivers will tuck to the second part of the apex and try and set up on the left and then get onto the power and head off towards one of the more important corners on the track, not here at Exmüller, but as we come up towards Bergwerk, we talk about those long runs, and that's going to be a long run all the way up the hill in towards Mutskurve, which translated to English directly means bravery. It is maybe the bravest corner of them all. Ade Koba-Lopez has been brave in the first half, though, of this lap as he heads off to Bergwerk, already 1.6 seconds clear.
Just the way he dances that car out of that corner is fantastic. He's just opened up that commanding lead when you consider the amount of straights that are in the first section of this lap, and as you can see by the timing tower on the left hand side, it does look like he's broken the majority of that toe.
Yeah, and now as we head up off to that carousel, it's where the fun begins. I've seen various track maps that people draw to make things easier to communicate with their teammates, and they just call it the fun section to translate after what you get to see after the carousel. Now, Koba-Lopez not totally clear of that 3 machine, still 1.5 seconds that margin, and now maybe if Koba-Lopez is a rocket ship in a straight line but struggles through the slipperier stuff, will those behind start to close that margin? Interesting to see that 5 cars hold in this train right now, and outside of 2 drivers that have had issues, Ackerman and Sarles, we still have 14 Lotus 79s out on track.
Yeah, and it looks pretty good at the moment, like you're saying. A lot of people fighting really hard over the positions. Of course, it's a relatively small field, but that's not always a bad thing, because it means the quality is usually quite high between these drivers. And on a circuit as demanding as this, you're always wanting to have a battle, and I feel like in this size of field, you're going to get a nice one wherever you are on the circuit.
Absolutely. I think the advantage of coming to the Nordschleife, no matter what series you are, is that you'll get the ringers come out in force, whether they have experience in the car or not, and just to try it out and feel it out in many ways. And so maybe some of these drivers unfamiliar. Seb Alexander is not unfamiliar to us here at RaceSpot, especially given that he competes in the Lionheart Retro Series, where we take this Lotus 79 and we throw it onto the ovals. It's a lot of fun Thursday evenings in the US, and so do join us on RaceSpotTV for all of that. 1.5 seconds or so. It was holding steady between first and second through that penultimate sort of sector of the lap. Now down through the Stefan Belloff S's, off towards that final carousel. Margin still at 1.6. Koba-Lopez not totally clear of the draft.
Not totally clear, but certainly close enough. It's going to be interesting to see how these final few corners, crucial, critical corners of the lap, are negotiated for our leading drivers to see whether they can break free from that toe.
Haven't had a chance to look at a replay of what happened at the start just yet, but that's because outside of that, there hasn't been much to look at. Blasting onto the Dottinger we go, and Koba-Lopez tries to break the toe. 1.7 or so that margin at the start, and it's not a very straight. It goes up and down, and so oftentimes you'll find yourself staying in a lower gear at this part of the straight just to rise yourself up before you head off into that final corner at Tiergarten. Let's not forget that we're staying on the Nordschleife. We're not heading off to the Grand Prix section after this very next corner.
It's very, very common to think that was going to happen, and even in my head, I was feeling like we were going to head on to the GP loop, but no, we're at the traditional full Nordschleife circuit, holding host to these cars for several years during this period of time, and yeah, like you say, just coming down to the end of that straight there, the gap really hasn't closed enough for Kimo I'll just say Chemo for now. So for him to be able to close up to Adicobo Lopez, realistically, I think he'd want and expect to be a little bit closer at this point in time. However, there's still long straights left before we get towards more technical sections of the lap, so potentially he could still close up.
We're not expecting fuel stops or anything today, which is a good thing, because there's not really a usable... Well, there is a pit lane. It's not usable realistically in racing conditions. Alexander, by the way, passed by Smetna for 6th down the Dottinger. Not really a challenge there. And again, just a reminder, there's no fixed setups here, so these drivers have that ability to dial in downforce and therefore grip through corners, but also straight line speed to their preference. This is the great thing about Friday Night Primetime, is we get to see new faces occasionally. Maybe the struggle for us as commentators is that the first time that we see some of these names is when we actually jump into the session about 2 minutes before we go live. So for now, he's the driver of the 3. We'll try and get the name correct by the end of the 5 laps. That's a RaceSpot promise for you if I've ever heard one. I'm impressed though that these 5 cars are holding relatively steady. It gives me pause as to whether they're really pushing right now, Will, or if they're holding back for the final couple of laps of the race.
I think it's always very hard to push 100% at this fearsome track. It's one of these tracks that, you know, it's more old-fashioned. It's not like the Red Bull Ring where you can go off track and you'll be fine, but the FIA might not like you, but you will be fine. However, here, you know, any wheel wrong, you're hitting a really large curb that could end up having major consequences, or you're touching the grass. You know, it's a massive challenge to dance around this circuit, and like you mentioned earlier, it is almost some sort of a street track in the way that you are almost dancing between invisible walls.
It is my favorite track to drive in the world. It's my second favorite track in the world, because unfortunately the Indianapolis Motor Speedway has now stolen that from my heart. Let's go back and look, by the way, at what happened then on the start here, and check out what happened to Bjorn Ackerman, potentially to Sauls as well. It's down through the... it's on the entry into the Hudson back, and that's a clumsy one initially, and then... So Ackerman gets involved in the first part of it, and I think Sauls gets involved in the second.
Yeah, I think Sauls was just trying to stay out of everyone's way, but the curbs are so big around here that it grounded out the car. This initial incident, you couldn't really put much on Sauls. I think he was rightfully up the inside, but like you say, hitting that curb is so vicious and grounds out one of these cars, you know, that's so low to the ground, being ground effect based, and unfortunately you see the consequences there.
Just to confirm, it was Sauls that T-boned Ackerman. I couldn't quite pick out who the other machine was that ran into Ackerman initially and got squeezed onto the curb. On board with Bjorn Rundfeldt up on the run towards the Moot Curve. Just hear it, just listen as they fly their way through this left-hander.
Ooh, a change down in gear,
it's
like you hear there.
Bravery is a misconception, because some people will think that it's flat in every car. Not the case. Why it is so brave, it's because how little speed are you willing to bleed off without running yourself off into the grass?
I think everyone in the iRacing career of sorts can say that they've crashed at that corner if they've drove this circuit. In many cars, it's right on the limit with a very minimal curbage on the outside to catch you if you do run a little bit wide, and we've certainly seen some big crashes there over the years.
So many of these corners have become legendary, courtesy of not just sim racing in many ways, of course, but YouTube as well. In fact, there's a corner that we'll come up to shortly, a Brunschen Ice corner, that for many has become known as YouTube Corner, because there's a channel that just is parked basically every day, that there is action on the track on the outside and filming stuff that goes on, and so it's always interesting to see. Top 3 starting to break away from those behind, by the way. Cobo Lopez being kept honest as we head off in towards that YouTube Corner. You've got to be careful not to pick up too much of that curb on the outside beyond the actual limits of the physical track for the most part itself. Big snap there from Reiner. You can tell how much they're pushing now.
Yeah, and a superb section from Chemo there, the number 3 car. He's closed up maybe 2, 3, 4 tenths of a second on to Adicobo Lopez. Of course, let's not forget Adicobo Lopez, a driver with over 9,250 I rating, one of the very best on this service, and some of these veterans, these championship leaders in this Lotus car, are keeping him honest here today.
Absolutely, and that's the thing. It's always great to see the fact that Addy can jump around with us on Friday Night Primetime and be quick in basically any car that you put him in. It's always an impressive feat, but I think now we're potentially going to see some wheel-to-wheel stuff. Runefeld gets passed by Timothy Reed in towards Galgen Kopf on the run down into the Dottinger, but now Draft's going to be swapped back around, potentially chance for the 6 to slither back up into line and work his way on forward. But once again, just that reminder that at the end of the straight, after we head on to the brakes through Tiergarten, we don't head off to the GP section. Instead, we hook the right and head off to the Nordschleife for yet another lap.
And you see that gap coming down, tenths and tenths every second. It's just over 4 now for your battle between your race leaders. And as we saw, 9 tenths at the start of the Dottinger, and now it's only 3 as we start our 3rd lap of this race.
It's right on board from just behind the race leader, who potentially might have also just pushed the tyres a little bit more. Now, these are bias ply tyres designed to go full race distances, but in the 2 or so years that I've had the pleasure of commentating on this car, we've seen many changes, not just physically with iRacing giving a major graphics overhaul, but just in the driving characteristics as well. As of late in the Lionheart Retro Series, we've even been talking about tyre changes on road courses, so it's definitely been a bit of a shift in mindset, and maybe that's where the experience is going to come in, because look how close the 3 is as they run up towards Flugplatz.
Yeah, and like you say, it's been a car that's been here for over 10 years as of April this year on the iRacing service, but having the rework done in Season 4 of 2022 really revitalised this car, and we now look like we have a battle for our lead.
Here we go, going to be side by side for a moment, but potentially not risking it just yet, knowing that they're breaking away from the gaggle behind that has started to splinter up, down in towards the heavy braking zone at Arenberg, both getting tidily down to the apex, crucially onto the power nice and early to propel themselves in towards the compression and in towards Ardnar Forest. These two starting to put up a bit of a clinic up front, and you made a really valid point earlier, Will, with saying you're never always pushing 100% around the Nordschleife, because if you are going to find the track biting you. These two are being able to push the closest to 100%, but also potentially the closest to the limit.
Yeah, and they're going to be right on there. It's a case of, pushing your limit as far as you possibly can without crashing, and we certainly see people push very, very hard from time to time on this circuit, and it's claimed many a famous name across the years and the 24-hour series and across all of these weekly series that we see happen. And you can see the Chemo almost losing the rear end through that section.
Juho Reiner still holding them relatively honest behind. He's not really been dropped in 3rd spot. 4th and 5th, Timothy Reed and Bjorn Runefeld have been separated from the rest of the pack, and not in too much data from Petr Smetna being able to challenge them in that number 8 machine, almost 9 seconds off the pace. The only really battle outside of the front 3 to keep an eye on is potentially Seb Alexander coming under fire from Jean-Francois Boscus, but as for 7th and 8th positions, almost 15 seconds off of the lead, and we've got 3 cars within 1.2 seconds halfway through this race. Only 15 minutes left to push. I wonder if that final lap is when they'll really give it their all.
100%. Everyone wants to win under the spotlight. People feel the pressure on, and sometimes you see them perform. We've seen many, many good performances over the years on this Friday Primetime series, and I think we're going to see another one here, because it's always good to have a race, and we might have a move on now.
Look at the overspeed, that draft so significant, and Koba Lopez doesn't have the chance to defend. Kimo Vilkainen has gotten to the race lead, and now through bravery extends the margin.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic move through what we call Bravery Corner, and we've also seen Kimo Vilkainen be very, very fast through this specific section of the lap. Whenever we've seen him close on Adekoba Lopez in the prior laps, it was always in this section, so potentially a chance for a breakaway.
Oh, look at that Mercedes AMG board that's just decided to block our camera shot. I think it's Viljakainen, by the way. We're getting closer and closer. It's a lot better than my first attempt at saying the name. Yeah, exactly. The main issue is that I don't have Iku Merakala to send me his like voice notes, which is what I did for the iRacing Rallycross World Championships with some of those difficult names that you've got to say. I don't have that same benefit. Bjorn Runefelt doesn't have the benefit of a fast repair either. Hopefully he doesn't have a damaged race car spinning up at the top of Hoa Act, but that does not look good.
No, that looks like it's crabbing. Some damage to the rear left, it looks like, and that's pretty much race over, and it's going to be very, very hard to even get that car to the pit lane, so we may see a tow from him.
He's going to try. He'll make an effort to get it back to pit lane. He's not the only one that's had some issues, so let's take a look at some replays once again. I think this is coming off in towards Bergwerk based on the look from up above. And ooh, that was potentially Adam Klatska getting too much onto the grass and spinning it around. Just showing you how important pushing the limits are there. Let's take a look on board though here with Runefelt and see what happened to him.
So easy to straddle the curb, but he actually didn't do so. Catching that curb with the rear left just unsettled the car, that just slight amount, and as soon as you start to hit that grass, it's game over really, and it shows you how small of a mistake that is. That's percentage of steering, that's a millimetre of tyre too wide, and you're dead. And that's how unforgiving this track really is.
And so now Boskus and Alexander have gone on past. Runefelt drops to 8th, but still out there on track and trying to run his way back to the... Oh, as Josh Freed becomes the latest victim of the green hell. One by one they are starting to drop, but not at the front, where still 3 cars are on their way towards the end of lap number 3. We're down to the final 2 laps now. It is a new race leader. Ade Coba Lopez for the first time has to deal with some dirty air, and he's got 2 laps to try and find his way back to the front.
You know what's really interesting here? It looks like Coba Lopez is running a higher wing angle. It just doesn't look like he's gaining the same amount as we saw Kimo Valkainen, something like that.
Villiakainen, I think.
Yeah, Villiakainen.
There you, oh, you got it!
I got it, yeah.
That sounded finished, properly finished there.
Iku Marikala will be so proud of me, I'm sure.
He will be. By the way, Boskus in front of Alexander, who may be another one running higher downforce, because look how much Boskus just continues to pull up in towards the braking zone of Tiergarten. And the fact that he is running less downforce is going to make it very difficult, not just to hold the lead if he was able to get to the point, but he's always going to be stuck behind Villiakainen because that car in front doesn't have the downforce to go through the corners as quickly, and a lot of these corners don't have space to run too wide.
Yeah, and there's not much space to pass when you get there. And do you know what? That was very surprising on that back straightaway that we didn't see that sort of game that we saw from Kimo that lap before. So I'm starting to think, what can Ade Coba Lopez really do? He's really going to have to be on it and be very, very close if he wants to make a move, much closer than he is now.
Yeah, but you can see that he is pulling just that little bit, closed, what, half a tenth on the run in towards the Arenberg complex. Down through the gears, they will work again, with the top 3 continuing to be split by just 1 second. But Timothy Reed in no man's land, 2 seconds off, hoping that they start to squabble and bring him into the mix for a podium, if not a victory. And Smetnar has continued to pull away from Jean-Francois Boskus, while Seb Alexander just trying to hold on to the draft of that car in front. And I wonder how much wing Ade Coba Lopez is running, because it didn't look like he was able to break away necessarily in any of the twistier parts of the Nordschleife on the end of the first lap. And so clearly Kimo has great control over that car, even if it doesn't have that much grip to offer him.
Yeah, well, it's one of these lesser supported cars in the iRacing roster in terms of like a setup shop place. They don't really tend to do this car due to its popularity being more niche. And I think this is where you really see the specialists in this category, like we have, you know, the 3 of the top 4 in the iRacing Championship for this season inside our top 4 here today. And I think the fact that they have the specialised knowledge about how to set this car up, how to extract everything out of it, they could potentially be running on a better setup than we see Ade running on this evening.
Maybe we'll get a chance to chat with Ade. He knows where our team speak is, knows where to find us. Runefelt, by the way, did manage to make it to pit lane, but he's been there and sitting for almost 2 minutes and counting, so don't expect to see him out on track anytime soon. Significant damage. I tell you what, Coba Lopez is close to what, within half a second, but didn't get a great run out of Bergwerk, and now what might have been an opportunity to close, maybe not to pass, sees him just struggling to try and reel himself back towards the race leader.
Yeah, you can see that gap coming down, but it doesn't come down too fast. I really feel like we need to see Coba Lopez 4 tenths back, going on to Dottin to her to have a real go. We do see it closing, and with enough bravery through this corner, we may see a small look up the inside, but yeah, at 3 tenths, it's just not quite close enough.
Into the carousel. This is what I was also saying earlier, where for Coba Lopez, this is where he is very much bound to the speed of the car in front. Cannot really force the issue too much. For example, through the carousel, it's a 1-groove corner, and at some points it feels like maybe there's half a groove. Both of them bobbling on exit. The bumps on the exit really just propelling the rear end around. Both hang on to it. If there's going to be a move, it's going to have to come here. I don't think if you're Coba Lopez, you can really risk being in second, coming onto the final lap of the race with a top speed deficit.
Yeah, but can you risk not being close enough to pass? It's one of these things, you know. I think that we saw last time around he had a full lap behind and he wasn't able to get close enough. This time by, he certainly seems a lot closer, but you know, do you want to take that risk of leaving it a lap and then maybe your opposition hits the lap of their life ahead of you and you have no chance, or would you rather lead? It's really an interesting dilemma.
We can jump on board with Reiner, who can operate as our camera car from behind and also provide us maybe the best soundtrack in the world. The rumble of the Lotus 79 as they continue to dive their way through the green hell over to Flans Garden 2, where they do get some air, given the speed and the downhill nature of the jump there. But now off to the Stefan Beloff S's, where just look at the commitment that they're really going to have. White knuckle ride here to stay full throttle through the undulating ride in towards that complex that will lead you into that second carousel. And this is potentially my least favorite corner on the track, because the first carousel feels like there is some sort of a rhythm to it. This one does not.
It feels very easy to fall out and make a mistake at this corner. And we certainly saw Reiner do just that as we were on board. But like we said, that gap's opened up for Kimo Valkleinen.
Oh, you got it right before as well.
I know I did, I know, but I'm trying my best. I'm so sorry. But like we said, that gap's opened up and it's not going to be close enough. So he's going to have to take the every chance that he gets to make the move here, if he gets another chance, throughout the remaining of these, let's say 6.5 minutes.
And so we're going to have, 20-ish kilometers to run when we hit the line and get ourselves the technical white flag. I think the iRacing declared length is 22.81 kilometers and 154 turns, but turns at the Nordschleife is a hot button topic, much like track corner numbers are here in the RaceSpot commentary booth. Officially 1 lap to go, final lap of this race. 1.2 seconds still splits the top 3.
Well, whether we know, at least this track has numbers and not letters, but we'll move on from that topic. The final lap here, it's going to be interesting to see. You know, last lap we had an interesting dynamic, that gap was very, very close at points, yet whenever it seemed to matter for it to be close, onto these big straights, it never was. So, could be a chance to see a very, very brave move here from Coba Lopez, and who knows what could happen. There's still a long, long way to go for these drivers and a lot of mistakes to be made.
Yeah, you've got, 154 corners, that's 154 opportunities for mistakes, is, I guess, one way of looking at it. Here's a look at a mistake that did happen for, unfortunately, Byron Long, and it's down in towards Callenhard. That car doesn't look healthy already, does it?
No, it looks almost like he's maybe had some damage before. It's certainly not a normal spin that we'd see. Yeah, he's got some kind of crabbing on, maybe from an earlier incident, some car contact that we've maybe not seen. And unfortunately, we're not getting quite the picture that we need to see what happened to the car. But yeah, it just spins on him. I'm not quite sure. Well, maybe a different incident that we're seeing there. I'm not sure.
Yeah, this is different. Okay, that explains a bit more.
Yeah, and that's what's going to have knocked that steering out of line and can make these cars so hard to drive.
I think we've all done that before, to be honest. We've had an incident and in the act of trying to get it around, made some contact that made it worse. I will note that You've got to be careful here at the Nordschleife because the curbs are quite raised, and if you find yourself on the curb in the wrong spot, you will be bottomed out with no recourse to get away. Hopefully nothing these drivers are necessarily too concerned by. Robert Simpkins has made a mistake. Cam Porter slides through into 9th as a result. But now, this is where for Kobe Lopez, half a second off with that better downforce, middle part of the Nordschleife. He's going to have to go for it as Timothy Reed continues to drop back.
Yeah, maybe a mistake though, because we saw Reed hold him quite close for the first 3 or 4 laps, but got still a reasonably large margin to pass her behind. So should be able to maintain that position on this final lap.
Yeah, let's see if we can piece together what happened, at least with the most recent bit of drama for Timothy Reed and why he finds himself no longer only 2 seconds off the bat. Just too much commitment.
Ooh.
Really tried and did a good job to keep it off the wall, all things considered. We can also go see what happened with Robert Simpkins.
Yeah, so just coming through very fast section, gets a twitch, and wow. As soon as you hit that wall, or as soon as you hit that grass, it's all over.
I think that's fluke plots.
I think it is, yeah, I think you're correct.
That's a scary... Okay, we need to watch this full section as the leaders head off towards the Moot Curva.
Running a low wing, I imagine. It's
that's scary, I tell you. Here we go, though, Will, up towards the carousel with 2-10 splitting the leaders. If you're Kobe Lopez, where are you going for the move, or are you waiting for the mistake?
And that was a mistake, down into the heavy braking zone. Of course, these cars have no assistance on the braking, being from the late 70s, and that was certainly one that could have cost Kimo this race win here today. But we've seen Adi Kobe Lopez this close before. We've not seen Reina this close before either. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. If they can stay this close, they'll have a chance certainly onto the Dot and De Her.
Is there a chance that if Reina stays this close, he gets the double toe out of the Dottinger? Does he have a chance to slip by the both of them on the final lap of the race? Are we going to be 3 wide? Has Kobe Lopez just been holding back? I've got more questions than answers at this point.
Absolutely. I mean, I would say that if we were that close going on to the Dot and De Her, we'd certainly have a her-raising finish. But as we go into Kimo's favourite section of the lap, I thought he was opening it up, but it's certainly close.
It is very close. Also still close between Jean-Francois Boscus and Seb Alexander for 6th and 7th position. Just a second or so splitting the two of them. Outside of that, it is just the top 3 that we continue to watch. Overflat's got a 2, and the mistake! He was leading for 3 laps, and finally the pressure was too much for Kimo Vilakainen, and Ade Kobe Lopez retakes the lead, but with Juha Reina still right behind.
That's crazy. I didn't expect that to happen at all. We've seen how fast he's been through that section all the time, and, well, it could have set up an even closer finish here.
I think now, surely, odds are stacked against Ade Kobe Lopez. Is going to need a monster of a run out of Galgenkopf with just 4/10s back to Reina. Who's going to get the better exit here on the run to the line?
Certainly a very good corner from Ade Kobe Lopez, but we've got Reina close in behind. Kobe Lopez will attempt to break that draft as aggressively as possible. We've not seen much of the wing angle or how much top speed Reina has, but he is closing fast.
Is he closing quick enough, though? On that climb up towards Tiergarten, Kobe Lopez trying to jink back and forth, but with too much momentum, surely. Juha Reina pops to the outside. They'll go under the Bilstein Bridge. Kobe Lopez tucks back into the draft, hoping to try and maybe find a way back up the inside on the brakes, but maybe it's too little, it's too late. He'll try and find the line. Reina shuts the doors shut, and in a dramatic last lap pass, in a last lap that will be remembered in primetime history, Juha Reina waited, and comes out on top at the Green Hell.
What a race that was there from Reina, and what a pass on that final lap. Such a good battle down the Dut into her, and wow, I'm speechless.
Incredible racing. We see the unfortunate Raccoon Racing entry of Vilakainen come across the line in 3rd. He will be somewhat frustrated. You have no doubt about that, but what a show he put on for us initially. It's Jean-Francois Boscus who will come across the line in front of Seb Alexander with just 4/10 of a second splitting them, the closest pair that we'll see through the field. And now we'll just wait for the last couple of cars to come to the line, the likes of Wolfram Fund, Cam Porter, and then Robert Simpkins, in addition to Bjorn Rundfeldt and then Steve Sarles. As always, the fun thing about being here at the Nordschleife is that we'll have a long wait for some of these drivers to get to the line, because Bjorn Rundfeldt's not even at Bergwerk just yet.
Yeah, well, we're going to have a nice little lap to watch him complete this. A little bit of a solo qualifying kind of onboard situation, but it gives us a chance to reflect on that race that we just saw. It gives us a chance for maybe some of our drivers to come and speak to us potentially. But yeah, I mean, I don't think any of us could have predicted that last lap and just how dramatic it really was.
Maybe we can go back in this time while we wait for some results as well, to go look at that mistake from Viljakainen, because he had looked so good. It looked so good until it wasn't good, which I think is, such an obvious thing for a commentator to say. But there are times that you are genuinely surprised by things, and I think it's fair to say this was included. It's just getting onto the grass. It's just pushing that little bit too much. Great car control, though, to be able to gather it back up, get it through the grass, and hold on to third.
Yeah, well, it just looks like he turned in too late, and I think it was a couple with the pressure, knowing that that gap had to be a certain margin for him to be safe on that final lap, and we'd seen him push so hard throughout the course of the race. We talked about there being plenty chances for mistakes, and just that pressure, that constant drive to be perfection and to get as close to the limits as possible, ended up costing him the win.
Absolutely. So we can see for Steve Sarles a run to the line, but as they do so, we can grab a look at your unofficial race results. Of course, still waiting for Bjorn Rundfeldt, who is on the lead lap, to finish up and be scored as the final car on that leading lap. Sarles, unfortunately, is one lap down. Reiner on the last lap, on that last run down the dot, and just slides his way past Adekoba Lopez, who maybe with less downforce just did not have the top-end speed to come out on top here today. Kimmo Viljakainen, third, will be slightly frustrated potentially, but put on a show for us, that's for sure, while Timothy Reed holds on to fourth in a bit of no man's land. Peter Smetna in fifth, finishes in front of Jean-Francois Boscus, while Seb Alexander, Wolfram Fund, Cam Porter, and then Robert Simpkins round out the top 10. Back in 11th spot, we find Adam Klatska, the last car to have finished and be on the lead lap, at least for the time being, as we still wait for Bjorn Rundfeldt to run to the line. Steve Sarles, as well as Byron Long, one lap down, with Josh Fried and then Bjorn Ackerman 2 and 3 laps down, respectively. Fastest lap went the way of Reiner on lap 4, showing that maybe he was just waiting and biding his time until it was go time. Once again, the Nordschleife puts on a show, and well, the classic Lotus Grand Prix Series will return to this track on GSRC on Sunday for what's going to be an exciting race, that I have no doubt, but we can already look forward to Friday night primetime on July the 14th. The vote has already gone live, and I think we know what we expect to be the winner here, Will, in terms of the fan pick, but between the Radical at Laguna Seca, the Falcon Sports Car Challenge, aka LMP3s and GT4s at Zandvoort, Spec Racer Ford at Lime Rock, and Formula 1600 Trophy at Phillip Island. There's a little bit of everything for everyone.
4 excellent choices, and 4 choices that will be well supported throughout the week. We know what we expect to win, but what do you expect to win? Have your say in the RaceSpot Discord. You can vote and just see what you want to happen, and your vote does end up mattering.
What do you think's going to win then, Will?
Well, it's got to be the Falcon Sports Car Challenge. Such a popular series, new kind of series for this season, and with the very, very popular new LMP3 alongside the already popular GT4 class, I can see the votes streaming in for that one. Yeah,
but you see, here's my issue with that. I've already had the LMP3 car once this season.
Well, you put it on the list. You're the one that makes the vote.
I know! Yeah, hashtag blame Arjuna. You went straight to it, didn't you?
I always blame Arjuna around here.
Just remember, racespot.wtf/Discord. That's the place where you can come and join us for all of the, not just chat around Friday Night Primetime, but everything building up to it as well, because we have a lot of fun. And this is just part of it. Well, for now, it is time to bid you farewell once again. RaceSpotTV allowed the fans to pick, and, well, it turned out it was a good pick to send the Lotus 79s heading off to the Nürburgring Nordschleife for the latest round of the Classic Lotus Grand Prix Series. Friday Night Primetime returns 7 days from today, but for now, for the team at RaceSpot, for Will Chadwick alongside myself, Arjuna Kankiparty, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you in a week's time to rumble around the iRacing official series once more.